Riot Chapter 7. The next day, after a mid-morning breakfast, Brian combed his hair in the bathroom mirror, brushed his teeth, and put on deodorant he'd bought for the first time last week. "Mom," he'd said, "I think my pits stink." She sent him to Kmart with $5 to buy his own. He'd picked out a green and white brand, same kind as Dad's. He went to the piano, sat down, and thumbed through the pages of his greatest hits book, looking for a good song to play. The doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Alyssa said. She jumped up from her game of chutes and ladders on the living room floor with Josh. They were both still in pajamas. Alyssa bounded for the door. "No," Josh said, scrambling to his feet. "I'll get it." "I called first," Alyssa screamed, tugging at the back of Josh's jet-patterned pajama bottoms. Josh pulled at the handle and fell back on top of Alyssa. They tumbled in a heap. Alyssa started crying and slugged Josh in the side. Mom's voice came from the basement. "What's going on?" "Up there." In the open doorway stood Chelsea, in a cream sweater in the morning light, softly blanketing her shoulders. Behind her was Cam. "Hi," said Chelsea. She was holding a white box with a red bow. Brian swung his legs over the piano bench, his face growing hot. She was at his door with a gift. This was too much. Wait till Kyle heard about this. Hi," he said casually, stepping toward the door. He jammed his hands in his jean pockets. "What's up?" "Here, this is for you." Brian's mom came upstairs. "Who's here?" "Oh, hi." "Mom," Brian said, "this is Chelsea and her brother, Cam," Chelsea said. Glancing at Cam, she flipped her brunch braid over her shoulder. "Yeah, Cam. I met them yesterday at the beach." Chelsea smiled, but Cam's expression didn't change. It was blank, impossible to read. "From our mom and dad," Cam said slowly, as if he'd rehearsed the words, "for saving my life." His voice was slow and a bit mechanical. Mom looked hard at Brian. "Saving your life? What's this? I haven't heard a word." She looked back at Chelsea. "Tell me." "Oh, I'm sorry. We're making you stand there in the door." "Come in," she said, waving her arms toward the kitchen. "Are you kids too old for a popsicle?" Brian rolled his eyes. If Mom did anything at all to embarrass him now, he'd die. "Sounds great," Chelsea said. Cam shook his head. "I want grapes," said Alyssa. "Me too," said Josh. Before Mom could open the freezer door, Josh beat her to it and grabbed the popsicle box. "Last grape," he said, grinning at Alyssa. Brian held his breath. He knew this meant war. Couldn't Josh and Alyssa act civilized for once? He glanced over at Chelsea, who was holding back a smile. When her eyes caught his, he looked away quickly. "That's not fair," Alyssa said, her lower lip protruding farther with each sound. Mom pushed both palms forward. "Stop it," she said. "You two go to your room for forgetting your manners. The great popsicle goes back in the freezer. Neither of you get it." Josh stared at Mom hard and shook her blonde head slightly. "Go," Mom said. "I'm not joking." Shoulders sagging, the twins headed down the hallway, whispering to each other. "It's your fault." "No, it's your fault. I got there first." Brian didn't know what to do with himself. He didn't know this girl or her brother. What was he going to talk about? Did they really want to sit in the kitchen with his mom eating a popsicle? "Let's go out to the deck," Mom said. "I want to hear the story about my heroic son." After Chelsea and Cam chose their flavors, Brian picked out a banana popsicle. He sat in a white deck chair between Cam and Chelsea. Gretzky trotted from the backyard and sat at Chelsea's feet. He licked her bare knee, rested his head on her denim shorts, and looked up at her. "Gretzky," said Brian, "maybe she doesn't like dogs." "I love 'em," Chelsea said. She pushed her face closer to Gretzky's. "I've always wanted one, but my dad said it wouldn't be fair to the dog on account of our moving so much, so I don't think it's fair to me." Chelsea scratched under Gretzky's red collar. Gretzky leaned forward into her fingers and groaned contently. "He's so adorable." Lucky dog, Brian thought. Chelsea handed the gift to Brian. "Okay," Mom said. "I know it's not Brian's birthday, so what's this all about?" "Open it," said Chelsea. Cam's dark eyes smiled. Brian hesitated and then pulled the red bow off and opened the small white box. Inside, beneath a lining of wax paper, were chocolate candies. This was too much. He was getting chocolates from Chelsea? Well, not really from her parents, her family. Cam spoke up. "I fell off the dock," he said, "and I don't swim very good." "That's for sure," Chelsea said, glancing at Cam. "I learned to swim when I was really young, but Cam never liked the water. When we were moving around so much every year or so, he never really learned." The smile in Cam's eyes faded. His stony expression returned. "So," Mom said, circling her hands for more details. "Everybody just stood around," said Chelsea. "I froze up. I didn't know what to do, but Brian dove right in after him." Mom leaned forward on her knees. "Yes?" "He dove underwater," Chelsea said excitedly, "and came right back up to the surface with him. I don't know how he did it, because I couldn't see anything. I thought the water would be crystal clear here, but it's so dark." "It's minerals," Brian said. He felt the need to defend the water, as if he didn't have enough battles lately. "Really, the water's clean." "Wasn't there a lifeguard there?" Mom asked, looking at Brian. "She was there," Brian began, "but she wasn't coming fast enough." Guess that makes you a hero, she said, playing with the opal necklace Dad had given her last Valentine's Day. That's you, Bri. You're a doer, not just a talker. Brian didn't respond. He didn't like all the attention drawn to himself. When you were little, you used to run outside after rain and rescue the earthworms from robins. Right. Mom made him sound like a knight in shining armor. He felt more like a slug and wished he could slither away. He glanced at his right knee, which was pumping up and down 100 beats per second, and stopped himself. Are your parents here with the construction project? Mom asked. How could she? How could she come right out and ask? Chelsea and Cam both nodded. Neither spoke. Brian's stomach muscles contracted. He pressed his thumb against his jaw and stroked his upper lip with his forefinger. Have you had any trouble, Mom asked. How are people around here treating you? Chelsea shrugged. I don't know. Cam's face didn't move. You didn't just fall off the dock then, Mom said to Cam. It wasn't a question, more of a stated fact. She should have been an attorney. Cam shook his head of dark hair. Thrown in. Some guys were calling me a rat. Brian wondered how the teenagers knew Cam was from out of town. A number of the out-of-town workers were Hispanic, and their skin was much darker than Cam's. At stores, Brian heard some people using faltering English. It made them moving targets in a nearly all-white community. Then again, in a small town, just being new was enough to make a person stand out. My folks would have driven over here to thank you themselves, Chelsea said, but this morning they drove over some tacks on our street. Brian froze. And someone slit the tires on the neighbor's car and bashed in their windshields. Her smile had vanished. She looked blankly at Brian's mom. Why would someone do that? She asked in a pained whisper. Brian's tongue turned leathery. His stomach felt queasy. When he looked down at his hands, he saw they were trembling. He eased them under his thighs to keep them still, to hide them. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, said Mom. She shook her head back and forth. I'm so sorry. Brian stared at the straight boards of the deck. A fire had started underneath him, and he was being roasted from his feet up. His chest grew hotter and hotter, and then his neck, his chin, his ears, his forehead burned. They could tell... Could they tell how much he was holding back? Could they read his mind about what he had done? It wasn't against them, really. He wouldn't have done anything to hurt them. Where do you live, anyway? Brian asked, glancing up quickly. Chelsea's eyes met him, held for a moment, and then let go. He looked down at the ground, trying to act casual, as if her answer didn't really matter. 337 Hastings Street, south end of town. Oh, Brian answered hastily. I was just wondering. He and Dad were on Hastings Street. His head spun. How could he have known it was their street? The phone rang in the house. Mom jumped up to get it. Brian had to get a grip on himself. He picked up the white box and held it out to Cam and Chelsea. Here, have some. And thank your parents for me, okay? Brian, Chelsea began, reaching for the box and taking out a chocolate. Her eyes reminded him of a wounded animal. Do you have any idea who might have... Mom slid open the sliding screen door before she could finish. Carl Hunter called for you, Brian. The sheriff? He wants you to come down to his office. Brian tried to swallow. His face tingled. Had someone seen him? Hey, you can relax, Mom said, and her voice tight. It's me you have to worry about, Brian, not the police. You left the video camera at the beach. Oh, Brian said, relieved. He let out a silent breath. Mom continued, I made myself very clear about taking care of that camera. Lucky for you, someone was nice enough to turn it into the sheriff's office. Otherwise, you would be in deep trouble. She looked at Chelsea and Cam and turned to Brian. He said you can pick it up any time. Brian jumped up. He couldn't sit there a minute longer and keep up this act. Getting the camera gave him an excuse he needed. I'll go get it. Chelsea and Cam stood up and followed Brian into the house. We better go, Chelsea said, stepping out the front door. She turned to Brian. You know, you're a good diver. What? He blinked. Her compliment caught him off guard. Then he realized she'd probably only seen his flop. Oh, a joke, he said and tried to laugh. I get it. No, she shook her head. I watched you dive from the beach. I meant it. Why couldn't he even make small talk? Well, you're not too bad yourself, he said, sounding like a bad movie script. He shoved his hands in his pockets. See ya. He closed the front door, leaned against it, and let out a very long, heavy breath. Chelsea's skin, her voice, everything about her seemed soft. Her unfinished question burrowed deep underneath his skin. He felt like a chicken, a liar, a hypocrite. You have any idea who?